Thank you. So I'm Deepa Narayanan. I'm a program director at NCI SBIR Development Center. I've been here for about 10 years now. And before that, I was in a small business and I was part of writing SBIR grants and contracts. So I have some experience in figuring out how to write a specific aims page. So thank you, Judy, for giving me the opportunity to talk to everybody about how to put together a good specific aims page. Keep in mind that I'm focusing on NIH applications, and these suggestions may differ from other agencies. So what I'm going to talk about today is the following. Why is the specific aims page important? What are the elements of a good specific aims page? What are some of the do's and don'ts? And then I'll talk about a few other application components that can really help you draft a good application. Can you see my slides moving, Judy? Just make sure.
Yes, you're good.
Thank you. So going from idea to award is a long process, and you must be patient with the process. Once you have an idea, you've determined whether you're eligible for SBIR, you complete all of the required registrations, you identify the funding opportunity announcement, and figure out what you're going to do with the grant funding. And that's where you sort of start writing up a specific aims page. Now, but here's the important part. And I know that most of my colleagues have said this, and I'm going to be repeating this innumerable times throughout my presentation: get programmatic feedback. I'm going to keep repeating this as much as possible, because that's the one message that I want you to take away after this whole thing is get programmatic feedback. And program directors are very happy to discuss that with you. We highly encourage you to do that, and that help you draft a good application. Then you submit to peer review, figure out how funding decisions are made. Again, program can help you figure out, because funding decisions are made at different ICs, and each IC has sort of a different formula, different procedure to figure out who they're going to fund. So again, talking to program will help you figure that out. Hopefully you get some funded. If not, then again, go back to program and they'll help you how to figure out how to resubmit your application. So just a few examples of people who've gone through these process. Aruna Gambhir from Cell Sites had her own technology, and she used it to leverage these SBIR funding that she got to get contracts from Big Pharma to further develop her technology. Laurie Hazelhurst, on the other hand, had R01 fundings, and then she used that, the data that she got from R01 funding, and then applied to the SBIR to convert the basic research that she had done into a commercial product, or into the commercial product world. So those are some of the examples of people who've been successful with the SBIR applications. I saw this question come up during the chat, and I know that Stephanie answered this question, but I still want to kind of talk a little bit about what we are looking for in an application. So we are looking for product-based solutions to an unmet need. Ideally, the technologies proposed should leverage the expertise of the founder. The technology should have a commercial potential if it answers an important scientific question, but it does not have a commercial application, then it is probably more suited for an academic grant than an SBIR. There needs to be a commercial market for it. We are agnostic about the size of the market. For example, at NCI, we will fund products for small markets like rare cancers, but like I said, there has to be a market. One of the goals of the SBIR program when it was conceived was to translate federally funded research into the clinic. So if there are technologies that are developed or funded initially by academic R01s, R21s, we can certainly use SBIR and STTR for product development. The important thing is that there must be a product. I like showing this slide essentially because it clearly differentiates between how SBIR and STTR grant works versus academic grants. So while in academic grants, the science is the most important aspect, it's product that is the most important thing for an SBIR, STTR. Good science is important. I'm not saying that science is very important, but if it doesn't result in a product, then it's not a good fit for the SBIR. So we focus on product development rather than discovery or basic research. And innovation, for example, is defined not as what is theoretically possible, but more in terms of competitive advantage compared to the current standard of care or state of the art. And of course, commercialization plan is very critical for the SBIR application, and Todd Heim will cover that in great detail in the next set of talks. So why are we focusing on the specific aims page? So why do we have 30 minutes of this entire session devoted to one single page in a very large application? So that's because the specific aims page is the focal point of the application. This is the first page I turn to when I'm looking at a new application. This is the first page most of the reviewers look at too. So first impression matters, and you need to make a good first impression. It becomes a more difficult job to sell the reviewers on the rest of the application if your specific aims page is not up to par. So, and it really should be a mini one-page application that captures the entire essence of the application. What is the innovation? What is the impact? What do you plan to do? What will be the anticipated outcome? And once you have a good specific aims page, it can help you frame the rest of the application as well. There are some links here for sample application. NIAID has the best set of sample application. NIA has a couple, and I think SBIR at NCI also has a couple of application. I can't promise these are all stellar, all have stellar specific aims page, but at least it can be a start. Now that we know what is in a specific aims page, how do we sort of structure it? Remember, all of this has to be done in one page. So this is not a simple task, and I would recommend taking the time to get this correct. I sometimes say that you probably should spend as much time on this page as much as you do for the rest of the application put together. So the specific aims page, essentially I'm dividing it into a few sections. So the first is where you provide the background. What is the product? What is the innovation? What is the significance? And so on. And then you sort of the middle two-third essentially should really go on your aims, what what really you want to do, and then you sort of wrap it all up by talking about next steps and where you hope to be after you have accomplished those particular aims. I'll go into detail about some of these things. So this is a sample application that I pulled off from the NIAID website. And I know it's too much to see, but it's too small for you to see. But essentially what I wanted to say is that the page should mention the clinical problem that you're trying to solve. Why is it an important problem? Why is it an unmet need? What is essentially working, what's not working, and what is the gap that you're trying to fill? Then in the next paragraph, you can talk about what is your technology? How does this address the problem? How does it bridge the gap? What have you done so far? What is your stage of development? And very clearly state what the product is. This is the first thing, a very important thing to do is to state clearly what your product is. And what is the unique selling point about your product? What is the innovation that you bring to the table? All of this should be there in sort of the second paragraph or the first 1/3 of the application. And now onto the aims themselves. Ideally, you should have about 2 to 3 aims for each phase. Propose aims that are reasonable based on the current state of technology development and that are appropriate for the funding opportunity announced. I'm just going to go to the next slide because it shows some of the aims a little bit more clearly. Again, provide quantitative milestones or success criteria as much as possible. We realize that all aims can't have quantitative success criteria, but provide wherever possible. And the criteria must be reasonable. If you provide a very low bar or threshold, then that can backfire during review. And end the whole page with sort of next steps. Where do you think you're going to be at the end of those specific aims? This will sort of help program and reviewers evaluate if the proposed aims are really going to get you to the point you said you want to be at the end of phase 1 or phase 2. And more importantly, add a sentence to show how your product is going to be commercialized. And you don't have to have a full-fledged commercialization plan, even if whether you're in phase 1 or phase 2 in the specific aims page, but a sentence on how this is going to be once commercialized would really help. So just want to go over some do's and don'ts and about the specific aims page. So to summarize, write technology-driven or product development focused specific aims rather than hypothesis-driven research. So I was Googling before I put together the set of slides on what makes a specific aims page, what is there on the internet. And there's tons of information about how to write specific aims page, but most of them are focused on academic grants, and there's a lot of emphasis on hypothesis or basic research focused specific aims. Keep in mind, all of them are not, it's not the right flavor for the SBIR STTR program. So it's more product development focused aims rather than hypothesis driven research. Keep the aims scientific. Now, what do I mean by that? I mean, technical objectives are more competitive in peer review than non-technical objectives, though they may be crucial to get the product commercialized. So for example, getting documentation ready for the FDA is a very crucial step along the path to commercialization, but it's not really a great specific aims. Similarly, meeting with the FDA, good milestone, but not a specific aim in itself. So make sure that the aims are scientific. Provide alternative strategies wherever possible. Plan B is always a good idea. And keep in mind, all of this is one page. So whether you're applying for a phase 1 or a phase 2 or a fast track, you only have one page of specific aims. And for fast track especially, it's very important to have clear go, no-go criteria at the end of phase 1 so that program can really check off and say, okay, done, done, done before you go to phase 2. So keep that in mind. So what all this, take the time to write a good page of specific aims, get programmatic advice, and make sure you have the time to revise these specific aims. This is an iterative process. You contact us, we'll give you some feedback, you go back and you revise the specific aim, and sometimes you may need to come back to us again, and that's okay. We don't mind if you come back to us again once you have revised the specific aims page and improved it. What this also means is that don't try to contact program a couple of days before the deadline with specific aims page, because we really cannot help you a lot if you do that. We try, but it's not going to happen. So try to contact us at least a few weeks before the application deadline. Again, now some don'ts. Don't propose aims that cannot be achieved in the time and budget specified. So that's important. Don't rush through your specific aims page. Make sure your aims are logical and backed by data or sound scientific rationale. And that's important. And then again, the specific aims page is not the first page in the application. When you look at the entire package put together, it's somewhere in the middle. But it is the first page we read. So avoid acronyms, avoid jargon, or anything that is not clear. This page should really stand independently. So keep that in mind. I want to talk a little bit about the abstract. So this is different from the specific aims page, and sometimes new applicants confuse this. Abstract is essentially a very high level view of what the technology is, but why is the abstract important? Now, so when you apply for an SBIR grant, and this was covered by a lot of people before me, you're essentially, when you're applying to NIH at least, you're applying to NIH. You're not applying to a particular institute. And applications are sent to the Division of Receipt and Referral within CSR, the Center for Scientific Review. They take a look at the abstract and title. So for example, this is in monitoring the HIV epidemic is there in the abstract. It says rapid test for HIV infection. So then they send it to NIAID, and then they assign it to the appropriate study section. So the abstract and title are important for getting for finding the right institute and the right study section. Of course, and this was also mentioned earlier, you can suggest which institute you want in the PHS assignment request form, which is part of the application package. And that is also a good suggestion to do. And there's also a place in the PHS assignment request form to suggest who you do not want to review your application. That is the people who have a conflict of interest, and also the identifying the scientific areas of expertise who you need to review your application. Here, you're not giving the names of people. You cannot say you want Dr. So-and-so to review your application, but you can say you want somebody with this particular expertise, and that's always a good idea to add that. So all of this is part of your application package. So, and the reason I'm mentioning all of this is about the review process is essentially to tell you, sort of how this review process is going to work. So again, application is submitted to NIH, and then each application is assigned to maybe 2 to 4 people who are subject matter expertise and who probably have those expertise that you requested. And those are the people who are going to read your application cover to cover, give you the individual feedback, the individual critiques, and so on. But keep in mind there are about another 20 odd people in that study section who are going to score your application. Now, it would be great if everybody read your application cover to cover, but unfortunately, that's not the case. It's very unlikely that everybody will read your application completely. So what happens? Many of them just look at the specific aims page. And usually they look at the specific aims page while the discussion is going on. So again, that's one of the reasons why the specific aims page is important, is because in that really quick, short read, you should cover what is special about your application. And so that's another reason why I feel that the specific aims page is critical. So another way to sort of understand this is just get the review experience. We're always looking for qualified reviewers. We would love to have people who have industry experience. So volunteer to be a reviewer so you can get firsthand experience of the entire review process, and that will definitely help you improve how you write the application. I think this has been covered before, the peer review process and the different criteria that peer review uses to review the application. Again, the reason I'm putting it here is that a sense of all of this should be there in the specific aims page. The significance, approach, innovation, investigator, and environment are scored review criteria. The commercialization plan is not a scored criteria, but it is very important we take a good look at it before we make our funding decisions. And again, Todd will cover that in great detail, I'm sure. Once you have the specific aims page done, then you can sort of elaborate on all of the things that you mentioned in the specific aims page in the research strategy. Here's where you provide the background information. Here's where you provide the preliminary data. Now, if you look at the application, it says preliminary data is not required, but I have never seen an application that's funded without preliminary data. So it is really required to be competitive. And here's where you provide all of your technical plans to achieve the specific aims. You expand on what your quantitative aims and success criteria are. You elaborate on what your plan B and potential pitfalls and how you plan to sort of address those pitfalls. And it's always a good idea to to have a timeline or a Gantt chart that sort of says this is how you plan to get the work done. Sometimes, and this is a very common thing that we hear the reviewer says, these specific aims is very over ambitious. They're not going to be able to do this in the time proposed. So a timeline or a Gantt chart is a very good idea to sort of address that kind of critique. These are other application components. I'm not going to go over this in detail, but I left it here because when you get the set of slides, I thought it would be nice to have this there. So that's the reason it's pretty much there. But these are all important application components, and these are things that you need to look at when you submit the application. Again, same thing with the budgets. Keep in mind, we have total costs. The total costs include direct costs, indirect costs, and a fee of 7%, and which the companies can request. The budget varies by IC. Each IC has their own sort of budget cap, and most ICs have waiver topic for technology specific areas that we can exceed the NIH caps by. For example, at NCI, our phase 1 is about $400,000 and our phase 2 is $2 million. So that's our cap, but every IC has their own funding sort of determination on what their caps could be. Again, an important reason to contact program before you apply. Technical assistance is above the cap, at least at NCI. It may differ at different ICs, so talk to program about that. We also have an excellent technical assistance for phase 1, which is the needs assessment program. I encourage all of phase 1 companies at least to take a look at that. That's very I think it's a very well put together program that might be useful. Hopefully you do get funded the first round, but our first time funding rates are rather low. I think our resubmission success rates are about 3 times, if not 4 times, our original submission rates, and that's because reviewers generally ask questions, and when people respond to those questions, they feel better the second time around and give it a better score. So you are allowed one introduction page, which sort of sits right before the specific aims page. And in the introduction page, you address when there are critiques or particular comments made by the reviewers, you address those comments specifically. You don't have to address every single critique because you wouldn't have the space for that in that one page, but the major critiques must be addressed. And it's always a good idea. So for example, if this particular awardee said that edits to the original submission are included in bold brackets in this resubmission, and wherever they made changes, either in the specific aims page or in the text of the application, they used the bold font to do that. Now that's useful if you're making minor changes. If you are making major changes in your application and your specific aims page, it's probably not a good idea to do that because your application will look it'll be very difficult to read if it's bolded everywhere. So so it depends on how much changes you're making as well. But that's another thing that I wanted to point out. To conclude, a few things that I wanted to highlight. Again, what we're looking for is innovative product-focused science that has a demonstrated clinical and market need and commercial need. Keep in mind, understand the review criteria, have appropriate collaborators, and a well-written specific aims with quantitative milestones is very, very important. And review sample applications and other funded projects. And another very, very important factor, submit early, contact program before applying. Once again, contact program before applying. And on that note, I think I will stop and I can take a few questions. I know I spoke very fast, but the slides will be available.
Well, I appreciate you making the slides available. We've had multiple requests for that, very detailed and great advice. Well, a couple questions. One is you referenced the significance of the specific aims page. It's almost like an executive summary for a company, and that the peer reviewers sometimes don't make it through the rest of the abstract. I'm guessing that you still would, that folks who don't spend any time on the abstract and the rest of the application, that will show up. So they still need to be, you're recommending a strong specific aims, but not a weak rest of the application is my question.
I'm not recommending a weak rest of the application, because keep in mind that the other people that your score, when you are submitting an application, it is assigned to 3 to 4 reviewers. They read the application cover to cover, and they're the one who give you the individual criterion scores. And so that is equally important. But the specific aims page essentially is the first impression, right? That's the first thing we look at. And if that's not good, then you have a tougher job with the rest of the application to get the reviewers interested in the application.
That makes sense. I just wanted to clarify, because we've seen even at BHI some applications come in with typos, and it says usually I think near a deadline someone's in a hurry, and so they fill out the rest of the information. So I had a question. How do you become a peer reviewer? You mentioned that you're looking for them. Where does someone go if he or she wants to become one?
Right. So at the Center for Scientific Review, on their website, there is a link where you can apply to be a reviewer. So that's one suggestion. And I can send you the link in the chat window in a little while. Otherwise, feel free to reach out to me. I mean, I can give you my email address as well. If you want to be a reviewer, send an email to me and I'll make sure it goes to the appropriate scientific review officer.
And we already have someone volunteering. What are the criteria for being a reviewer?
So you should have some subject matter expertise in a particular area. If you've had grants previously, that's better, whether that is academic grants or other grants. That's that would be a good idea, because that's where really most of the reviewers are sourced from previous grants. But if you have subject matter expertise, and we generally look at the CV of the person who wants to be a reviewer, and that's where the SROs make their decision on.
Thank you. And I know Todd's going to talk about commercialization plans in phase 2 in another couple minutes. And one of the questions that came in is, can you, and I think the question should also be, when should you apply direct to phase 2 versus phase 1 and then a phase 2?
So it all depends on how much preliminary data that you have. So if you have tons of preliminary data, then you and your research is such that it can be sort of split into a phase 1 and a phase 2, then it makes sense to sort of submit to a fast track. If you have lots of preliminary data and you can do all of that in one shot, then yes, phase 2 makes sense. It's very application dependent. So I'm sorry to keep repeating this. Talk to program.
Talk to the program officer. We're getting that message. Here's another question. It's my understanding the screens, toxicology, PK, PD, et cetera, are not allowed research endeavors under an SBIR. Is this accurate, or can the experiments for this type of data be part of specific aims in a research plan?
Okay, this is not accurate. We fund tox, we fund PK, we fund PK/PD studies all the time. So,
I wonder what
that's not right.
So Carol, not to call you out, but you're on the Q&A. It sounds like following up with the program officer is exactly what Deepa would recommend to get, to share your specific technology. What is the biggest, you have 2 minutes, what are the biggest 2 failures on specific aims that you see? I know you did do's and don'ts, so maybe in that list. But
so, and I'm talking about, this is my 2 sort of pet peeves. Maybe somebody else has different pet peeves, but mine is I don't see a product, and I have to keep guessing what the product is. Then I'm not very happy then if I have to guess what the product is. And 2, if the specific aims page really doesn't have any milestones or success criteria, and it's very vaguely written, we are going to do PK studies. Yeah, but what? Those kind of things. Those are my 2 biggest pet peeves.
And we just heard from Ben at NSF, who's really focused on the commercial relevance and opportunity of the technology. But you've also emphasized that that's important.
Everything is important. You asked me to do 2. So if I would have had a 3rd one, then I would have added that.
Sorry, that wasn't fair. A 3rd pet peeve. All righty. Well, thank you. That's very informative, and your slides have even more information that this is obviously useful across the institutes, as you mentioned.